ODIN was my second ever circuit design and the oldest surviving pedal in my lineup. In that time, it hasn't really changed. What does change is how we use pedals. And it's been 2 years since we updated ODIN, so I thought it was time for that to happen again. As I said, ODIN is my oldest surviving circuit, and it feels to me almost like a relic from a more optimistic time. I was trying to break through in the music industry. I was playing a lot live, going on tours, doing support gigs for bigger acts, stuff like that. And in that time, I did some support shows for an Immortal Orchestra, and I became friends with a guy who is kind of the main guy in the band, Ruben Nielsen, a lovely guy. And I gave him what was to become the Embla, and he's been using it, I think, ever since. And then he showed me a pedal that he had built, which was a Fox tone machine. And I had tried to build Fox tone machines a few times, but I always found them to be sort of too mid-scooped and too sort of strenuous and just dirty sounding, too sort of industrial in their voice, and I didn't quite like it. But his sounded amazing, and so we partied all night, and then the next day I sat down by my desk and put one together, and I very quickly realized what I needed to do to make it sort of my voice. Embla at the time was using a very simple circuit, kind of like two range masters in series, where one of them had a bypass emitter capacitor, which increases the gain quite a bit. It also looked quite a bit similar to the what is called the Roland B-bar. So very simple, just cascaded gain stages. But what was special about it was I set the voltage to be exactly 66.6% of the voltage supply, and I set the gain to be 6.66 in gain. And this gives a very open and very sort of noble and very uncompressed, clean type of gain that worked really well, because I was often using orange Tiny Terrors. I was playing AC15s, AC30s, stuff like that. Fender DeVille's, these kinds of amplifiers. And so having something that worked almost like a clean boost, but still had that sort of edge from a fuzz was just absolutely mandatory to getting the sounds that I wanted, because I felt bored by overdrives, and I still do. They do too much stuff, but most fuzz pedals at the time would feel too scary and too sort of chaotic and crazy, because I grew up in an era where we would use clean amplifiers as the platform for our guitar tone, and then you would stack pedals into it. So you would have maybe a blues driver and a tube screamer, and then some crazy fuzz of some sort, maybe the Death by Audio Fuzz War, maybe the ZVEX Fuzz Factory, or maybe just a Big Muff. And usually you would get your gain from one pedal, and then you get sort of a distortion fuzzy thing with two pedals engaged. You might have a clean boost, so you just sort of stack milder gain stages to get a kind of fuzz. And then the fuzz itself was for the crazy moments, right? And none of us knew how to use them. And then as I became a pedal creator myself, I think I, as well as a bunch of other people, started using more gain-forward amplifiers. I think this kind of coincided with Orange releasing its Terror series, which allowed us to bring our own amplifiers with gain in them to live shows. And suddenly you don't need the overdrive. You can do just a couple of boost pedals and you'll have a fuzz tone if you want, or just a boosted whatever you already have. And that kind of spurred my career into pedal making. And so ODIN has always been basically just an input stage that mimics what a fuzz phase does into essentially a clean boost. And that's what it is. So it takes your guitar and your amplifier and just boosts it up, but it also gives you the kind of interaction with the guitar and with the playing dynamics and all of that stuff. And then of course it has this just squeaky clean, beautiful octave up thing with lots of sort of differential notes, like bass heavy stuff that you can do further down the neck if you want to do it. And yeah, I made it as simple as possible. It's loud. You have a sort of stepped ladder where if it's off, you just have your clean sound, and then you add the fuzz and it's a little bit of stuff, and then you add the octave fuzz and it boosts the volume quite a bit as well. And so now we are changing again. People are moving towards digital rigs, people are moving towards transistor amps and just bigger, cleaner platforms in general. And so for the first time in ODIN's life, I've had requests to make it more gainy. And so I think it's important to understand that this thing is the same as it has been throughout. You don't have to buy the ODIN 4 if you already have an ODIN and if you're happy with it. It's not necessary. But what this thing does is it now allows you to use it with a cleaner amp. And so let's check it out. Okay, here it is, ODIN 4. As you can tell, it has the same switches and knobs as ODIN 2 and ODIN 3. So on the right hand side you have the bypass switch, and on the left hand side we have the mode switch that takes you from regular fuzz to octave fuzz. On the right hand side there's a tiny knob for the gain of the regular fuzz, and on the left hand side a gain knob for the octave side. Up top, the big knob is the master volume control. So all of this is the same as it has been for years now. Turn it around and we'll find the guts, and you can see the octave fuzz up top and the regular fuzz below. New for version 4 is we have these dip switches. Top one is for the octave fuzz, bottom one is for the regular fuzz. On the left, on each one, these are the same for each circuit, we have a boost function, and on the right we have the clipping function. As you can tell, these are the default settings actually, and this mimics what ODIN has been for years, where the bottom one has both the clipping and the boost off, and the octave side has the boost on and the clipping off. And so the reason for this is ODIN was, the way I designed it, it was meant as a kind of 1-2 punch type of package. And so you would have your clean amp or your driven amp, mostly driven amp actually, we'll get to that. And you could add the fuzz for just a bit of sort of extension to your guitar's dynamic range. You could add the octave fuzz, it gave you a bit of a boost, and of course octave, and it was a sharper, more explosive tone, and great for leads, right? So I would use the regular fuzz just for sort of riffing out with the boys, and I would add the octaves for whenever I needed to be heard for some kind of like solo or whatever, right? So yeah, let's listen to it in its true original form. Okay, there it is. So that's it. You don't really get to experience the quite substantial lift in just power and boost and output as you go into the octaves, because we're on YouTube and everything is squashed, and so that's not as obvious as it will be, especially if you're playing on a clean high headroom amplifier. People have been wanting me to make these two circuits more in line with each other's in terms of output, but that was never the point of ODIN. But it is the reason that I first gave ODIN external gain controls for version 2, so that you can sort of turn down the octave circuit to make them more in line with each other's. And it's also the reason I released version 3 alongside the Basak version 3, which was a kind of milder, more leveled version of ODIN. And it's also further the reason it's one of the reasons I'm releasing the version 4. So you can get all the same sounds as in ODIN version 1 with any of these ones. What you do gain in addition is different ways to get closer to a situation where this thing works for you specifically. And this one is the most powerful yet when it comes to just making it work for mostly any rig. And the reason for that has to do with the internal switching, because right now we have that 1-2 punch type situation where we sort of step up a ladder into oblivion, into world dominance, right? And you might want to get them to be more aligned with each other's, and so you could do that by just turning off the boost in the octave side. So that's the first obvious use case for this. Anytime you do something like that, it changes something else. And one thing that's fun about this, and which was the reason that Basak 3 became a thing, was we discovered that there are two ways to think about octave fuzz. One is in terms of just making the most squeaky clean, precise, well-tracking analog octave up, which you can do and works better if you have it in the low gain setting on ODIN, or if you use the Basak 3 instead. But the other thing you can do with an octave fuzz is what's called differential tones, which happens further down on the neck towards the bass, When you play more than one string at a time, you can have this sort of heterodyning where two sort of rectified signals interact and create a third, lower note. And that works better in the boosted mode. But yeah, let's first hear the two different types of octaves in terms of just the squeaky clean, well tracking octave up thing. So this is it, not boosted. It gives you more sustain and more bass, obviously. You can hear that too. So that's pretty cool too. You can add the clipping. And that gives it a bit of a swell type function. Because it kind of behaves like a compressor at this point. You have a rectifier and a clipping section. It's kind of a compressor. It drastically changes the sound of the octave. But yeah, let's listen to the octave down stuff. It's much more prominent with the boosted signal. Is that the compressor? And it disappears. So yeah, I like it best in its original setting. Now let's go over to the regular fuzz. It sounds like this. I think that's perfect. It's kind of like a modern take on the fuzz phase. And one thing that a lot of you might have noticed is it feels a bit like a clean boost, just the regular fuzz on its own. And that's because it is actually relying quite heavily on its output stage, which was stolen from Embla, the circuit that I made before ODIN. And that's kind of based on clean boosts, just a bunch of them. But the input stage here is similar to a fuzz phase, so you can get the behavior of a clean boost with the input behavior of a fuzz phase. So it sort of responds to your picking dynamics, it responds to your guitar's controls, and all of that. But it still sort of marries with your amplifier in the way that a clean boost does. And so that's why that happens. Now, incidentally, if you're running a very clean rig, you're gonna get in trouble quickly, because this thing wants to push your tubes into saturation. And it won't do that if you can't let it, right? So I think we're going to try and mimic that with the Iridium. I could set it to the Fender setting and I'll have a clean amp, but it sounds absolutely disgusting on the Strymon. And so what I'm doing instead is I'm just turning down the gain in the Marshall setting, and that'll be kind of like approximating a Fender amp anyway, right? Because a Marshall is mostly just a spicy Fender, right? So at this point, it won't sound like a fuzz the way that it does when you're running it into a kind of gainy amp. And this is where these internal switches really come in handy for some of you. Now there's a lot of output here, so you can get it into fuzzy mode. But some of you might find that that's not enough. And at that point you could add the clippers, and it will do this. And you could add a bit more gain because it gets quieter, because it squashes the peaks, and it sounds like... And now we add the boost. It still cleans up. Not as nice as without any of that. So yeah, I mean, these are just amenities for you to figure out on your own. It's gonna sound completely different in your rig. This is a circuit that's not only responsive to your guitar's controls, your picking dynamics, your musicianship, but it also sort of influences what comes after it, such as the amplifier. And so yeah, it's gonna sound different to anyone who tries it. But now you can at least use it with your loud, high headroom, clean amp platform, and you can kind of get the same tones. I don't know if I managed to actually show you this with the Iridium, but yeah, this is kind of like adding an optional overdrive into the enclosure of ODIN, so you can just sort of, you know, use it as if you had a driven amp whenever you need that. And you do with ODIN. So there it is. Hopefully this is kind of future-proofing it a little bit.